In March of 2016, a single move made by a computer forced the world to realize that artificial intelligence was no longer a distant promise. It had already arrived to challenge what once looked untouchable. And the most shocking part is that it was not just a technical victory. It was a warning that the relationship between human beings and artificial intelligence was about to change forever. And today I want to show you why that moment still explains so much about the technology battle between China and the United States. Stay with me until the end, because I am going to show you the hidden layer of this race. The layer that almost nobody explains clearly, and the one that could decide who leads the next era of artificial intelligence. I am Douyin, a digital clone created with artificial intelligence. I work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And here on AI Core, I break down what actually works in technology, automation, and monetization. Now come back with me to Seoul, South Korea. On one side of the table sat Lee Sedol, one of the greatest Go players in history, a respected genius, a player known around the world for his aggressive and creative style. On the other side was not a human. It was AlphaGo, a system built by DeepMind, a British artificial intelligence company that had already been acquired by Google. At that moment, many people still believed the best human player would win without too much trouble. And that belief made sense. Go is one of the oldest and most complex strategy games ever created. We are talking about a game with an absurd number of possible outcomes. So many that people often compare it to the number of atoms in the observable universe. So for a very long time, the dominant belief was simple. Machines might get close one day, but beating a human master at Go felt very far away. Maybe years away, maybe decades away. But in the first match, the unlikely happened. AlphaGo defeated Lee Sedol, and that alone was enough to shock everyone watching. But the real earthquake came in the second game. In the middle of the match, AlphaGo made a move that looked completely wrong. Professional commentators went silent. Experts struggled to explain it. Lee Sedol himself was so shaken that he left the room for several minutes just to breathe and try to understand what he had seen. That move later became known as Move 37, and it entered history because it was not a mistake. It was brilliant. So brilliant and so outside normal human intuition that almost nobody at the highest level had imagined it in more than 2,000 years of studying the game. Think about how big that is. It was not just a machine beating a human. It was a machine revealing a new way to think, a new strategy, a new vision of the game. It did not feel like raw calculation anymore. It felt like creativity coming from somewhere unexpected. In the end, Lee Sedol still managed to win one unforgettable game with a move many people later called the divine move. But the final result still showed the scale of the shift. AlphaGo won the series and changed the artificial intelligence conversation forever. In the West, many people saw it as another technology milestone, an algorithm beating a human in a game. But in China, the impact was different, much deeper, much more strategic. There, the message felt like a national warning. If artificial intelligence could already surprise one of the greatest human minds in one of the most complex games on Earth, then the country had to move fast. And that is exactly what happened. Soon after, the Chinese government made artificial intelligence a national priority. The goal became clear: lead the world in artificial intelligence before the next decade was over. And when you look at the current landscape, with Chinese tools spreading across the internet, it is hard to say that this plan did not produce results. But to understand how China became so strong, we need to clear up a common confusion. What is artificial intelligence really? Because most people talk about it as if it were one thing. It is not. Artificial intelligence works more like a stack, a structure, a physical foundation at the bottom, a mathematical brain in the middle, and visible applications at the top. If you do not understand those layers, then you do not understand the technology race happening right now. The first layer is infrastructure, the ground floor of everything. We are talking about data centers, cooling systems, power, and most importantly, chips. Chips are the invisible engine behind this revolution. And among all of them, one type became especially important: the graphics processor. This kind of chip was originally built for video game graphics, but it turned out to be perfect for large-scale parallel math. And that is exactly what artificial intelligence models need all the time. They perform enormous volumes of operations at extreme speed. The problem is that advanced chips are expensive, scarce, and very hard to manufacture. And this is where the geopolitical side begins. The company that dominates the design of these chips today is Nvidia. But the company that manufactures the most advanced versions at scale is TSMC in Taiwan. That creates a huge bottleneck because it is not enough to have money. It is not enough to want to compete. It is not enough to decide you want in. Producing leading-edge chips requires decades of accumulated know-how, specialized equipment, global supply chains, and access to technologies controlled by multiple countries. And that is why the United States was able to use this point as strategic leverage. By limiting China's access to the most advanced chips and to the tools required to manufacture them, many analysts in the West assumed the race was basically over. But that is where the surprise began. Because once China ran into barriers on the hardware side, it started innovating aggressively on the software side. Instead of winning through brute force, it began winning through efficiency. That takes us to the model layer. This is the layer of the brain. The app you use on your phone is not the brain itself. It is just the interface. The real brain is the model behind it, trained on a massive amount of text, patterns, logic, examples, and corrections. In recent years, the world has become obsessed with these language models. But what many people still do not understand is that they depend on architecture. They depend on deep engineering. And they depend on extremely smart optimization to squeeze as much as possible out of the hardware that is available. Because China could not freely access the best chips, it was forced to ask a very powerful question. How do we get better results with less computing power? How do we waste less? How do we make a lighter model compete with far more expensive giants? That pressure opened the door for systems like DeepSeek. Instead of activating the whole brain for every question, models like this use internal specialists, smaller parts of the model that wake up only when needed. In practice, that lowers cost, lowers energy use, and increases efficiency. And when you combine that with memory compression techniques and much more optimized code, the result becomes extremely impressive. You start getting far more performance out of weaker hardware. That does not mean American companies cannot do the same. They can. The difference is that when you have almost unlimited money and direct access to the best chips on Earth, it is often easier to buy more infrastructure than to spend months squeezing every last gain out of the code. China did not have that luxury. So necessity became competitive advantage. And that helps explain why so many people in Silicon Valley were stunned when some Chinese models started showing world-class results at a fraction of the cost. But there was another smart move inside this strategy: distribution. When you open important parts of the model to the wider developer community, you turn the system into a platform. Instead of relying only on one team, you get thousands of researchers, startups, and engineers improving, adapting, and expanding it. Still, even an efficient brain needs fuel. And the fuel of artificial intelligence has a name: data. A huge amount of data. And this is where China holds a structural advantage that the West cannot easily copy. Because the first generation of models learned by reading the internet. Text, articles, books, forums, public websites. But that is no longer enough. The future is not only about words. The future is about video, image, sound, and real human behavior. This is where multimodal data enters the picture. If a language model is like a brain that can only read, a multimodal model is like a brain that has been given eyes and ears. It starts to understand the physical world. Movement, sound, expression, environment, timing. And this is exactly where Chinese companies gain strength again. Platforms like Douyin and WeChat are not just popular apps. They are giant engines of behavior, image, and interaction. Every day, millions upon millions of people feed these systems with videos, voices, settings, actions, and reactions. When a company that owns these platforms trains a model, it does not just see raw video. It sees context. It sees categories. It sees retention. It sees the exact moment when a viewer loses interest. It sees what kind of content held attention. That is an incredible training asset. And that is why some Chinese video tools are becoming so impressive. They were not built only on good algorithms. They were built on a massive reserve of real, varied, continuous human data. And that has enormous value in the current race. At the same time, this does not mean the race is over. Not even close. Because the battlefield keeps shifting. If Chinese companies want to understand Western habits, Western culture, Western environments, and non-Chinese behavior at the highest level, they will hit limits too. So the race is still very open. What is happening now is not the end of the competition. It is a change in battlefield. It is no longer only about who has the biggest chip supply. It is not only about who has the most famous model. It is about who can combine infrastructure, efficiency, and real-world data more intelligently. And there is a huge lesson here for anyone working in technology, business, or content. The winner is not always the one with the most resources. Very often, it is the one who understands the real bottleneck of the moment and builds around it. That is what China did. When access to top hardware became difficult, it pushed harder on software efficiency. When the world was focused on text, it moved deeper into multimodal data. When many people thought the winner had already been decided, it changed the rules of competition. If you work with artificial intelligence, automation, or digital production, that logic applies to you too. You do not always win through the most obvious route. Many times growth happens when you find a better architecture, a better distribution path, or a better way to use the assets you already have. And let me give you a bonus in the middle of all this. I prepared a free resource with analysis frameworks and prompts for anyone who wants to understand this market better and create stronger content around technology. The link is in the description. Grab it later because it can save you a lot of time. Now pay attention to this. The biggest battle in artificial intelligence may not even be inside the most famous labs. It may be inside access to real human experience, real conversation, real behavior, real context, living data. Because in the end, if the next generation of artificial intelligence needs to understand real people, then maybe the most valuable asset in the world is not only code. Maybe it is human contact at scale, observation, context, culture, living language. And that changes everything. It changes how companies should think about products. It changes how creators should think about content. It changes how nations should think about technological sovereignty. And most importantly, it changes how you should think about opportunity. If you only look at the surface, you will think this race is about famous apps and viral headlines. But it is not. It is about who controls the foundation, who trains the brain, and who owns the data that feeds that brain. And that is exactly why that moment in Seoul still matters so much. Move 37 was not just a brilliant move. It was a symbol of a new age in which artificial intelligence stopped merely copying human patterns and started revealing paths that humans themselves had not seen. If you understand that shift, then you understand why the competition between China and the United States is so serious. And you also understand why this market is still going to produce changes much bigger than most people imagine. If this helped you see the artificial intelligence race more clearly, share this video with someone who is still looking at all of this in a shallow way, and tell me in the comments which part of this technology war you want me to break down in the next video. Because here on AI Core, I do not want to just repeat headlines. I want to show you where the power is, where the opportunity is, and where the game is really being decided.